Welcome to Two Beans in a Pod. Today we're diving into some really interesting stuff you've sent our way,
Okay.
focusing especially on all the recent action in the bond market and President Trump's new tariff policies.
Okay, yeah.
We're going to really cut through all the noise surrounding these developments,
Right.
connect the dots between them,
Sounds good.
and then pull out those key insights you really need to know.
I like it.
So to start, what sources do we have to work with today?
Well, we've got a lot to unpack.
Okay.
There's a discussion between Andrew Schultz and Chamath Palihapitiya.
Okay.
They talk about possible ways to influence the market, to try to bring down the debt yield,
Interesting.
and also the relationship between tariffs and inflation, which is always a hot topic.
Right.
Then we've got an official White House fact sheet.
Ah.
It outlines the declaration of a national emergency
Oh, wow.
related to foreign trade, and it gets into the specifics of the reciprocal tariffs.
Okay.
Plus, we have some insights from Treasury Secretary Bessent.
Right.
He did interviews with Tucker Carlson and CNBC.
So we're getting it straight from the administration.
Exactly.
Oh,
and
okay.
to round things out, there's a Fortune article that highlights how important the bond market was
Okay.
in the decision to pause those tariff increases.
Got it.
And a New York Post piece by Charles Gasparino that digs even deeper into the bond market's influence
Okay.
and Bessent's role in that decision-making process.
So we're really going to look closely at this idea of maybe influencing the market to lower the cost of our national debt,
Yeah.
which is somewhere around $35 trillion, right?
Huge number.
And all that's financed through selling treasury bonds.
That's right. Basically, like the government issuing IOUs
Exactly.
to raise money.
We'll also get into the nitty-gritty of this new tariff plan,
Sure.
figure out why the bond market had such a strong reaction, and understand the administration's reasoning behind all these big economic moves.
Makes sense.
All right, so let's unpack this whole theory about impacting the market to lower the debt yield.
Okay, so you know how Schultz and Palihapitiya were talking about the national debt?
Yeah.
It's just massive, and financing it is this huge factor in our economy.
Right.
Just the interest payments alone are a huge cost every year.
So how much are we talking?
Well, the blended APR, that's the average interest rate on all the outstanding government debt.
Okay.
It's around 5 to 6%.
Wow.
Yeah, it adds up quickly when you're dealing with trillions of dollars.
Definitely.
And on top of that, we have to refinance a big chunk of this debt all the time.
Okay.
This year alone, we're looking at about $6 trillion in expiring debt.
So that means we have to issue new bonds to cover that.
Exactly.
Wow.
And here's a key thing about the bond market.
Okay.
When demand for treasury bonds goes up, the yields usually go down.
And lower yields mean the government can borrow money cheaper, right?
Precisely.
So this theory is about creating some uncertainty in the stock market
Yeah, that's the idea.
to get investors to move their money to the safer bet of treasury bonds.
Right, because when investors get nervous, they tend to flock to safer assets.
And that would drive demand up for those bonds, lowering yields in the process.
Exactly, making it cheaper for the government to borrow.
Interesting.
And remember when the president first mentioned these tariffs, we saw a little dip in yields, right?
Yeah.
Like the market was reacting to that uncertainty.
But there was another theory going around too,
Yeah, some people were worried about foreign entities.
like China.
Yeah, China's a big one. They hold a lot of U.S. debt.
Right.
The worry was that they might start selling off their treasury bonds.
Just try to push yields higher.
Exactly, kind of like a counter move.
Did Schultz and Palihapitiya buy that theory?
They considered it, but they thought it was unlikely to work for very long.
Why not?
Because the U.S. Treasury market is just so huge and so efficient.
Right.
It's really hard for any single entity, even one as big as China, to control prices by selling off bonds.
Right.
I mean, yeah, a big sale might cause some short-term downward pressure on bond prices, which could push yields up temporarily.
Okay.
But the market as a whole would likely absorb that selling pretty quickly, and any attempt to manipulate yields wouldn't last.
Gotcha. Okay, so that gives us some important background.
Yeah.
Now let's dig into the details of President Trump's new tariffs.
Oh, right.
The White House fact sheet talks about this national emergency declaration regarding foreign trade. What are the main reasons they give for taking this action?
Well, they point to a bunch of interconnected factors.
Okay.
They argue that these big, ongoing trade deficits in goods have really hurt the U.S. manufacturing sector.
Right.
And this decline in manufacturing has led to less investment in advanced domestic production, which has weakened our supply chains.
You know, that vulnerability really became clear during the COVID pandemic.
Exactly.
We saw how fragile those global supply chains can be.
Yeah, it was a wake-up call for a lot of people.
Definitely.
And the White House also argues that these trade deficits have made us too reliant on foreign countries, which can be risky.
Especially for things like our national defense.
Absolutely.
So their basic argument is that these trade imbalances aren't fair.
Yeah, they see it as other countries using unfair practices that are hurting the U.S. economy and our national security.
Interesting.
And to deal with this declared national emergency.
Yeah.
President Trump is using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act.
That's the IEPA, right?
Yep.
It gives the president a lot of power during national emergencies, usually when there's a threat to the country's safety or the economy.
Exactly.
So what specific steps is he taking using this authority?
He's using a two-part tariff strategy.
Okay.
The first part is a broad 10% tariff on goods coming from all countries.
Okay.
It's set to start on April 5, 2025.
All right.
Then there's a second part. Individualized reciprocal tariffs.
Meaning?
It means higher tariff rates for specific countries.
Okay.
Go ones with the biggest trade deficits with the U.S.
I see.
These higher tariffs kick in a few days later on April 9, 2025.
So on top of the 10% everyone's getting.
Yep. It's like an extra penalty for those specific countries.
And how long will these tariffs be in place?
The White House says they'll stay until President Trump decides the trade deficit and these non-reciprocal trade practices are fixed.
So it's kind of open-ended.
Yeah, it depends on how things play out in negotiations and whether other countries cooperate.
Right, right.
But it seems like he's willing to hold firm on this.
It sounds like there's some flexibility built into this plan, though, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like they can adjust the tariff rates based on how our trading partners respond.
Exactly.
So if other countries retaliate with their own tariffs against us.
The president can raise our tariff rates even higher.
Oh, okay.
But if they start working with us to fix these non-reciprocal trade deals and address some of the national security concerns...
He can lower the tariffs.
That's right. So it's like using the tariffs as leverage in these ongoing trade negotiations.
It's a pretty strong arm tactic.
It definitely sends a message.
Are there any goods that are exempt from these new reciprocal tariffs?
Yeah, there are actually a few categories that are excluded.
Like what?
Things that are already subject to certain tariffs, like steel, aluminum, and cars.
Okay.
Also, vital materials like copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, lumber,
Got it.
bullion, and certain energy and mineral resources we don't really have enough of here.
So these exemptions are meant to minimize any disruptions to key industries.
Exactly, and to protect our domestic supply chains.
Okay, that makes sense.
They don't want to hurt those industries while trying to fix the bigger trade problems.
Right. What about our neighbors?
Canada and Mexico.
Yeah, they're part of the USMCA, that trade deal we have with them.
Right, right.
How does this new tariff plan affect them?
Well, the fact sheet says those IEPA orders about fentanyl and migration, those are still in place for Canada and Mexico.
No.
They're separate from this new tariff order.
So for goods that fall under the USMCA rules.
The tariff rate stays at 0%.
Okay.
But anything that doesn't meet those USMCA requirements still has that 25% tariff.
I see.
And certain energy and potash products from them, those get hit with a 10% tariff.
All right.
And even if those fentanyl and migration orders were lifted, the fact sheet's pretty clear that USMCA compliant goods would still get that special tariff treatment.
Okay, so they're trying to balance these different trade concerns.
Exactly.
The White House is using some strong language in that fact sheet,
Definitely.
talking about taking back our economic sovereignty, saying that tariffs are necessary for fair trade.
Right.
What are their main points to support that argument?
They're essentially saying that we have to fix these ongoing trade deficits.
Okay.
We need to protect American workers from unfair competition from abroad
Right.
and make sure everyone's playing by the same rules in international trade.
So a level playing field.
Exactly.
And they mention past examples where other countries use tariffs and other barriers against U.S. goods.
Yeah, they see it as a pattern of unfair treatment.
And now they're saying enough is enough.
Pretty much.
They call it a golden rule for our golden age in trade.
Right? Treat others how they treat us.
Interesting.
They really want to put American manufacturing first and fix these trade imbalances.
They even cite some research that suggests positive impacts from a global 10% tariff.
Yeah, they're trying to build a case that this is a good thing overall.
And they point to former Treasury Secretary Yellen's statements about tariffs not really raising prices for consumers that much.
It's like they're trying to preempt any criticism about higher prices.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now let's hear from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent himself.
Right.
He's been talking about the tariff plan publicly. What's his overall take on it?
He sees it as a long-term vision, something President Trump's been thinking about for decades.
Oh, wow.
He compares it to what Reagan did with the economy,
Interesting comparison.
saying there might be some initial bumps in the road, but the long-term benefits will be worth it.
Okay.
He's really concerned about how China's economic rise has hurt American workers.
The China shock, as they call it.
Exactly.
And he's pushing for a reset of our trade relationships with any country he thinks isn't playing fair.
I see. He really wants to bring manufacturing back to the U.S.
That's been a big theme for the administration.
Yeah, and he ties it into national security, too.
Because of those supply chain vulnerabilities we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
It's like if we can make more things here, we're less vulnerable to disruptions from other countries.
Precisely.
He even said, Wall Street's done great. It's Main Street's turn.
Yeah, that was a pretty pointed statement.
What's the message there?
He's basically saying that working-class Americans haven't benefited as much as the financial sector from the recent economic growth.
Right.
They're the ones who've been left behind.
So he's trying to appeal to those voters who feel like the system hasn't worked for them. And what about the recent stock market swings?
He downplayed those.
Saying they were more about problems within those big tech companies.
Yeah, he called it a Magi 7 problem,
Yeah.
referring to those top tech stocks.
Okay.
But not a Magi problem, meaning it doesn't reflect a fundamental weakness in the overall economy.
Clever play on words there.
Yeah,
So he's saying the fundamentals of the economy are still strong.
that's his argument.
Like what?
He points to things like stable taxes, predictable business regulations, affordable energy, and deregulation.
Okay.
He thinks those factors will ultimately lead to a healthy stock market in the long run.
Okay.
He's also talked about using the money from these tariffs to fund the government,
Okay.
and maybe even give some tax breaks to the middle class.
How would that work?
His idea is to use that tariff revenue to offset government spending,
Okay.
which would reduce the burden on taxpayers.
Makes sense.
He specifically mentioned potential tax cuts for people making less than $150,000 a year.
So targeting those middle income earners.
Right.
Interesting.
He even referenced the classic economic theory about tariffs.
Which says.
Well, it suggests that the dollar could appreciate in value,
Okay.
and companies might absorb some of the tariff costs themselves,
Okay.
so prices for consumers wouldn't go up as much as some people might fear.
That's reassuring, I guess.
He even brought up a study from MIT about the impact of Trump's previous tariffs on goods from China.
What did it say?
It found that the overall price level only increased slightly.
So maybe not as bad as some people were predicting?
That's what he's arguing.
But didn't he say that any big changes to tax policy would need Congress to sign off on them?
Yeah, that's the catch.
It's not like he can just implement these tax cuts on his own,
Right, he'd need Congress to be on board.
which might not be so easy.
We'll see how that plays out.
Okay. Bessent also talked about something called the DOGE, right?
Yeah, the Office of Government Efficiency.
Okay.
He sees it as working hand in hand with these tariff revenues.
How so?
He thinks we need to attack the national debt from both sides,
Okay.
increase revenue through tariffs, and cut spending through the DOGE.
So it's a two-pronged approach,
Exactly.
and his long-term vision is to use tariffs to encourage companies to move their manufacturing operations back to the U.S.
Right. Reshoring is the buzzword.
And eventually, as more goods are made here, we wouldn't need as many tariffs.
That's the theory.
But then we'd be collecting more income taxes from those new jobs.
Precisely. It's about shifting the source of revenue.
Interesting strategy.
He seems confident in the American workforce's ability to adapt.
Especially with all the automation happening these days.
Yeah, he thinks technology can help us be more competitive.
But he's still worried about the high levels of government spending and debt, right?
Oh, yeah, he's very vocal about that.
So he's saying we need to get our fiscal house in order.
Both through these trade moves and by making the government itself more efficient.
Makes sense.
He even called himself the United States' leading bond salesman once.
What did he mean by that?
He was emphasizing his role in managing the national debt.
Right, because the Treasury Department is responsible for issuing those bonds.
Exactly.
And he's very aware of how much influence the bond market has on interest rates.
He called it the plumbing of the economy.
Interesting analogy.
He's basically saying that the bond market affects everything.
Right.
from mortgages to business loans to the overall health of the economy.
Okay, so let's talk about that bond market rout that the New York Post article mentioned,
Right.
where yields on the 10-year and 30-year bonds spiked.
It was a pretty dramatic reaction.
Do we know what caused it?
Well, there's speculation that a friendly country, maybe Japan,
Okay,
was selling off a lot of their U.S. debt.
so not China this time.
Doesn't seem like it.
Interesting.
But regardless of who did it, that selling pressure definitely contributed to the bond market volatility.
And the New York Post suggests that this bond market instability is actually what led to the pause in the tariff hikes.
That's right.
Not the stock market drop, which was everyone's initial focus.
It was all about those rising bond yields.
It's like the bond market was sending a clear signal that things were getting out of control.
Yeah, it was a wake-up call for the administration.
And they credit Secretary Bessent with recognizing that signal and pushing for the pause to allow for negotiations.
It sounds like he played a key role in shifting the strategy.
From confrontation to diplomacy.
Precisely.
He said something like 70 countries contacted the White House wanting to talk trade after those tariff announcements.
Yeah, it definitely got their attention.
And Bessent stressed that everything is on the table in these negotiations.
Including non-tariff barriers.
Right.
Things like VAT, currency manipulation, and subsidies.
Issues that have been sticking points in trade talks for years.
Exactly.
He also acknowledged that it takes time for businesses to make decisions about moving their operations.
Right, they can't just pick up and move overnight.
But he seems confident that companies are already planning for a potential shift back to the U.S.
Yeah, he thinks the writing's on the wall.
And remember those discrepancies in the tariff rate calculations that some people pointed out?
Yeah.
Bessent suggested they were intentional, a way to create bargaining chips in the negotiations.
Clever tactic.
He also expressed confidence in Republican unity behind the president's economic agenda
Okay.
and reiterated the administration's commitment to a strong dollar policy.
Which they believe can be achieved through those sound economic fundamentals we talked about earlier.
Right, those building blocks of a healthy economy.
Exactly.
He even argued that the U.S. is in a stronger position in these trade negotiations
Then countries with trade surpluses, like China.
because of our trade deficit with them.
Yeah, it's like we have more leverage because they need us to buy their stuff.
Interesting perspective.
And he emphasized the importance of President Trump's relationship with Chairman Xi.
That direct line of communication could be crucial in managing these complex trade issues,
Definitely.
especially if things start to escalate.
It's good to have that back channel.
And he also highlighted the talks they're having with individual companies.
Alongside those government-level negotiations.
So it's a multi-pronged approach.
Trying to influence things from all angles.
It's really remarkable how both the Fortune and New York Post articles independently emphasize that it was the bond market's reaction, more than the stock market's initial decline, that prompted the pause in those tariff increases.
Yeah, it really highlights how crucial the bond market is to the overall economy.
It's often overlooked, but it plays a huge role behind the scenes.
It's the engine that drives so much of our financial system.
So for all of you learners out there, it looks like we're at a pretty important crossroads in terms of trade policy.
Yeah, no doubt.
There's this push to rebalance the global economic playing field.
With a clear understanding of how sensitive the bond market is to these policy changes.
Exactly.
It's like walking a tightrope.
The interplay between these tariffs, any tax adjustments that might follow, and the bond market's ongoing reaction will be fascinating to watch.
Definitely a lot of moving parts.
The administration's main goal seems to be using tariffs as a tool to promote fairer trade and bring manufacturing back to the U.S.
Right.
They believe these policies will ultimately benefit a wider segment of the American population.
That's the hope, at least.
But that early volatility in the bond market was a stark reminder of how risky these big economic moves can be.
No doubt there are always unintended consequences.
And those upcoming negotiations with our trading partners will be absolutely critical in determining the long-term impact of all this.
It's going to be interesting to see how it all unfolds.
It really makes you think. As these big changes in trade and monetary policy continue to develop, how will they affect your own personal finances and the broader U.S. economy?
That's the million-dollar question.
It's a complex situation with so many interconnected factors.
Definitely a lot to keep track of.
And we hope this deep dive has given you a better grasp of the key forces at play.
We've tried to lay it all out for you.
And if you found this deep dive helpful, and you're eager to explore more of these critical economic and policy shifts,
Please hit that like button and subscribe to stay tuned for more analyses.
we'll keep you updated as things develop.
We've got a lot more to unpack in the future.
Thank you for listening to Two Beans in a Pod. If you're interested in the book, please order it from the link below.